This is Crispin Freeman, and you're listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files.
Recognized Uncle Walker D01. Recognized Chris Sniezak D31.
Hello, team. Today in the Watchtower, we welcome dear friend of the show, Chris Sniezak. Chris is the co-owner of Misdirected Mark Productions, Encoded Designs, and Lake Effect Gaming. He is also the host of the Misdirected Mark and Down with D&D podcasts, editor of the Gnomecast, Hobbes and Friends of the OSR, and so much more. Chris is also a writer, designer, and convention coordinator. Basically, if you're a part of the role-playing podcast or gaming community, Chris is there to support you. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh my God, I am on Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. This is amazing. I'm so happy to be here. I'm like the fourth or third or person from Misdirected Mark Productions, I think, to be on Whelmed. Maybe even more than that. I forget who else is. I think. Darcy's been on, Murray's been on.
Angela's been on. Yep, Darcy's been on. Angela's been on.
Did I miss anybody else? Am I three?
No,
that's fine.
We want to get Phil on, but Phil, I think he's finished the show now. I can't remember. He just keeps talking about it.
Yeah, he caught up. I think he caught up.
Oh, then we got to get a hold of him. Get him on the show too. All right, before we begin, I want to remind everyone that our discussion episodes draw on anything and everything related to Young Justice, including both seasons of the series so far, the comics, and the video game. If you've not seen, read, or played all of the material and are spoiler wary, please consider this your warning. And with all that out of the way, let's dive in. So, Chris, aside from your enthusiasm, I touched on a few things in the intro, but tell us more about who you are and what you do in the world.
I really like animated comic shows and the CW shows. I watch them pretty religiously. That's a thing that I do. I watch those. I haven't watched Black Lightning yet, though. So, I mean, I'm a little sad 'cause I'm a little behind on that.
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that first episode either, and I'm excited about it. I've heard good things.
Oh, wait a minute. You were talking about what I do in role-playing games. I'm sorry.
Just in the world in general, I said. So that what you said applies.
So I do that. I guess that's relevant to the show. I was a long time ago a jazz musician. I play trumpet. I do that still sometimes.
Oh, it's fun. Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I like to play. I went to school for it. I was actually in college. I think I was 6 credit hours, maybe 8 credit hours short of having a degree in music performance. No. So I mean, then I quit that, and then I got a degree in writing.
Wow, you just couldn't. Man, 6 credits. In retrospect, you're just like, 6 credits. Oy,
yeah,
it's just not that much.
I mean, my life got a little crazy at that point in time. I mean, for those people who want some oversharing, I had a kid, and I quit school to get a real job because I couldn't gig out at night anymore because I had a kid. So, because I used to do that.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So life, things changed a lot. That's a thing that I used to do and I still do sometimes. I really love music, so I like going to jazz shows and things like that. Role-playing games, I'm a game designer. I'm a writer. I freelanced a whole bunch. You can actually just go to my freelancing website, chrissniezak.com. That'll have all the stuff there. But aside from the podcast network and Encoded Designs, which is the publishing company, Lake Effect Gaming is the events thing the events company that I'm a part of. It now owns the Queen City Conquest, which is Buffalo's what we like to call premier gaming convention. This year will be its 6th year, and we're hoping to do some pretty great things with that. But we're also doing more events this year, so that'll be a very exciting thing coming up for 2018. Man, and I write for whatever too. Like I've done D&D writing. I've written for Part-Time Gods. That's a Layla Santa Third Eye Games. I've done some Fate stuff, including Part-Time Gods of Fate for Layla Santa. But I'm in one of the Fate codexes. We write this Patreon called the Character Cache. I've written 7 of those. They do Savage Worlds, D&D, and Fate. I'm a fiction writer too, but a lot of my fiction hasn't been really published. The only thing that has been published is a short story called a short story in a collection called The Mechanical Bard, Tales from the Ninth World. So that's the majority of stuff I do.
So that's Monty Cook Games compilations.
Yeah.
Then.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, nice. I'm a really big Numenera fan. Like, I think I think that and Cypher are fantastic games. I really should be writing more stuff for them since they have that license, but I don't. I'll get around to it.
Yeah, I feel the same way, actually. Their Into the Deep supplement is one of the best aquatic supplements out there. It's mind-blowing. Because
you're an underwater guy. You love all the underwater stuff.
I love it. And I picked up that supplement and I was like, oh, this will be good. I'll get some good ideas from this. And it's like every page I had to put it down after I read it because my brain was like bleeding from the ideas and what I wanted to do and how to adapt it for not just Numenera games, but like every other system I want to run. Like, oh, it's crazy. Supervillain layers or science fiction Star Wars stuff. It's just incredible. Like I don't know what they're doing over there, but their imaginations are bonkers.
Yeah, think about it. It's Monty Cook and Bruce Cordell and Shannon Germain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're all super creative people. And I think Randy Thompson, who I forget. Their team is ridiculous. I forget who's on. I always forget exactly everybody who's on that team. But there's like 9 people who work in that company. They do the work of like 20 people. It's ridiculous.
Including one of your writers, Darcy Ross.
Podcasters. I would like her to write and there's a couple of games that she's designed that I would like to publish.
I thought that she did. Doesn't she write some stuff for Gnome Stew as well?
Oh, she does write for the Gnome Stew. She's one of the gnomes, as we like to say. Yeah,
that's right.
She's a gnome.
Awesome. So when did you first see Young Justice? Did you see it on the original run, DVD, Netflix? What's your story there?
I watched parts of it during the original run. I didn't really sit down and run through the entirety of it until it was all finished. And then I did it illegally. I mean, but then
you're not alone. Unfortunately, they made it hard to get a hold of it all.
So then I watched it all once when it was sitting there on streaming sites, and then I've watched it all twice since then, since it's been on Netflix.
Right.
I mean, it's so good. I mean, that team is amazing that puts that together.
Absolutely incredible. Obviously, there's like 20 hours of show, and we have pushing 90 hours of analysis of their 20 hours of show. But what draws you to it then? You said you love the animated superhero stuff as well as the live action stuff. So what's your history with DC and comics in general before you saw Young Justice?
Well, when the Batman the Animated Series came out, like I was a kid. I was like 8 or 9 years old, I think, when it first started showing up on TV, and I'm like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And of course, one of the most impactful episodes as far as animated television goes is Heart of Ice, the Mr. Freeze story.
Heart of Ice was so good.
Yeah, it just caught me. Like even at that young age, I'm like, this is like I didn't know at the time, but later I was like, oh, this is like Shakespearean tragedy, but we're actually watching it in comic book form. This is amazing, right?
Yeah, I often make a parallel between what they did with Mr. Freeze, taking him from being an absolutely like just dumb, like just Batman cadre, Batman rogues gallery villain, and turning him into this horrifying and sympathetic villain. I'd make parallels between him and like the reinvention of him and Sportsmaster in Young Justice, because Sportsmaster is just the dumbest character in DC Comics history, in my opinion, one of, if not the. And they reinvented him to be like, why is he so competent? Why is he terrifying me? This is crazy.
Because they took the idea of like, if you are cold and you are calculating, you are much more ruthless. I mean, they leaned right into that, right?
Yeah, but they made him ruthless and then sympathetic because of his wife.
Yeah,
like that's
exactly.
The thing. Like they took the extremes and somehow balanced them into the show. And it was the second episode that I ever watched, and it's still absolutely one of the best episodes of Batman the Animated Series. It's crazy.
I mean, it's the one that got nominated or won an Emmy.
I think it won an Emmy. And which is just absolutely appropriate for that episode. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. So that drew you into DC animated stuff?
Yeah, because that was like the first. Before that, like the only things I had seen that were I like comic books and especially comic book shows like Super Friends with Spider-Man, Firestar, and Iceman. But that's Marvel, right? So
right.
I didn't see the Fleischer Superman stuff. I hadn't really seen a lot of that.
There wasn't much before then. Yeah. And the Fleischer Superman stuff had such an influence on the Batman and aesthetic,
Mm-hmm. But that and the characters and the way that it didn't feel like it was dumbing it down at all for kids, even though kids could enjoy it. Even at that young age, I got that. Like, I loved Hamill's Joker. Like, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I mean, I love what they did with the Riddler. Yeah, it is amazing. I love what they did with the Riddler. Like, such a good take on the Riddler. Yeah. It was the classy penguin, which is the penguin that I prefer. So, yeah. I mean, that's good. I know. I mean, everything they do over there. Like, Clayface was horrifying. Like, I love Clayface in that.
This was so good, and it was so cool to see how their take on so many things in the Batman the Animated Series had a direct influence both on the comics, like introducing Harley Quinn as a character who was just a background mall in the original series, but also Clayface, who shows up in Young Justice, the exact same take on Clayface, which is brilliant, right? So it influenced everything across the board, changed so much. Exactly.
Like you can't describe it any better than that. Like its impact on Batman mythology is it just keeps going. Like, I mean, you said Harley Quinn, like, which is more important? Like the take on the Joker from Hamill, the introduction of Harley Quinn, who's now become like an icon in DC. Yep. This new look at Mr. Freeze, there's just so many cool things that came from that television show, from Bruce Timm and I always forget the other guy's name.
Paul Dini.
Paul Dini, yeah. Paul Dini's pretty much amazing. I love listening to him talk about the show. It's so much fun.
Yeah, I love it. So I became a fan of you largely through all of the amazing things that are said about you in our gaming circles. I ran into you briefly at a Gen Con, but you were sick. I was supposed to run a game for you, and I think I remember meeting the back of you as you were running away after you dropped off some sound equipment for us, which was so kind. But you just crashed at the end of Gen Con. You were not feeling well.
Yeah, I don't actually know what happened to me. Like, for a while there, when I was doing cons, I would get to like the last day of a con and I would just be passing out constantly. Yeah. So I've been taking better care of myself now. Like right before we're doing this recording, like I was at the gym for like an hour. I do that pretty much every day in the middle of the day now. So.
Oh, nice. That's got to make you feel better. No, I appreciate that. But I didn't find out you were a DC Comics fan until one of our mutual listeners told me that my podcast was on your podcast. So you had started a new segment on Misdirected Mark, which is like introducing people to new podcasts you were listening to. And it made me so happy listening to that segment. It was amazing. So let me please take a moment to personally thank you for that. And then when we talked about having you on the show, your subject of choice was pretty clear. It was the big picture, non-Earth centered kind of DC galaxy, the Green Lantern Corps, the War World, all of the stuff, non-Kirby stuff that we've already talked about with Jeff Stormer. Like, you were in with that stuff, which we haven't touched really yet in our discussion sessions.
Which is interesting because, I mean, there's so much of it that I only know some of it, like, and I had to go look up a bunch of it, and I'm like, there's so much more of it. Like, I am not, I do not have like the greatest collection of knowledge when it comes to the Green Lantern Corps. Like, I wish I knew, but because there's so much of it.
There's so much though, man. Like, you'd have to be a scholar for it. And, but I mean, so, many of our listeners, don't have that history that you and I have of reading and watching stuff from even, back in the day and kind of how things have changed and evolved. But what is it about that wider DC galaxy kind of focus that fascinates you? Because it's going to play into, I mean, obviously it's going to be a huge part of season 3 based on their brief descriptors of what season 3 is going to be like. And what is it about it that draws you to something like the Green Lantern Corps?
Well, it's epic. First off, like, we're talking galaxy, universe, reality, time, travel, wide scale type stuff. And it's always that. Like, everybody points a lot at Crisis on Infinite Earths because it's important, right? Like, it reset a lot of things and changed a lot of things. But if you take away Crisis, like, it's the Green Lantern Corps and their stories that really get you into these. I mean, get away from Flashpoint too, because the Flash does the time travel stuff also and resets things. Right. But it's the Green Lantern Corps that's doing all this crazy stuff in outer space and talking with the source wall and how like we're gonna like destroy the universe because we're accessing the the electromagnetic emotional wave patterns. Yeah, I'm bad at names, so like I'm gonna screw up a ton of stuff. So people feel free to yell at me constantly. I'm gonna forget names. I'm gonna mess up names.
Well, let's dive into some of that because there was some of this stuff for me because I'm old. It is relatively new. So like there used to only be two colors. So let's talk about the history of Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps a little bit. So I'll talk about Alan Scott because he's one of my favorites. And then we can talk about the reboot from then on. Is that all right?
Sure, that's great.
So Alan Scott was the original Green Lantern, and he was a member of the Justice Society, which was active during World War II. And Alan Scott had a magic ring and a magic lantern that would do anything that he wanted to do and create these constructs and all of these things you're familiar with the modern character of Green Lantern or the many Green Lanterns. But there wasn't a core.
Not yet.
Not yet. It wouldn't work on anything made out of wood, which is why
that was so weird.
Which is why Sportsmaster was one of his horrible nemeses, was because he'd just throw a javelin at him and he couldn't do anything about it. So in the late 50s, early 60s, they rebooted a lot of these original characters into their what would become their modern versions. So the original Jay Garrick Flash was rebooted into the Barry Allen Flash. You had the Alan Scott Green Lantern was rebooted into the Green Lantern Corps, which was or the Hal Jordan Green Lantern, which was much more like science fiction cop and very inspired by the Lensman novel series, which is interesting. You should go check that out. But then I'm not sure it must have been the Corps. The Corps was created about then because Hal Jordan got his ring from Abin Sur, who was an alien who crashed on the planet, and then the ring went to Hal. So the Corps was created about the same time as Green Lantern, I think. But I haven't actually gone back and read some of that stuff. So can you take it from there?
So it was hinted at right then, right? Like there's a Corps out there. They haven't, but of course they'd only started putting that stuff together, so they hadn't fleshed it out in the books yet. So, right. I mean, it's all that you just start hinting at this, that, and the other thing. So you get Hal, he gets the ring, and we start, the Green Lantern thing. And it's exactly what you said. Like there's not really much from that except for like the ongoing story that starts there. Like he's the Green Lantern. He starts making things out of will with his mind. It's no longer wood that's the problem anymore. Right. It's things that are yellow.
The color yellow, which is just worse. It's just anything painted yellow.
You think it's bad. You think it's terrible or bad or whatever, but eventually, like when because they play so hard into that color thing at some point, and then they make actual reasonable reasons. I'm using air quotes as reasonable reasons for why these things happen.
Reasonable comic book reasons. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Because let's just talk about the Corps then, because Hal Jordan's doing his thing on Earth. There's actually like 3,600 sectors in the universe, and the Green Lanterns basically patrol all that stuff. And there's like 2 lanterns per sector. So there's like over 7,000 lanterns running around in the world, or in the universe, I should say. And their main planet is a place called Oa, and that's where the battery is. So the battery is this source of energy that all the Green Lanterns' rings, their power rings, come from. And that's where they can use their will to manifest all the stuff that you see. I mean, for those of you who haven't read the books and only saw the terrible live action movie, which that's too bad that movie was terrible, because, it could have been a lot better. And I like Ryan Reynolds a lot. So, I mean, like, I didn't even think he was that bad in it. I just thought that the movie was kind of garbage. You can see how they can make all sorts of stuff out of, that. I mean, better examples go just watch Justice League and anytime Green Lantern's on there, they do really cool stuff. So on Oa, there is I think they're the Guardians, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the Guardians.
They're the ones who kind of created the Green Lantern Corps. But as time goes on with these books, you find out that the Green Lanterns weren't the first sort of galactic police force that they came up with. There were these things called the Manhunters, which, strangely enough, you can get confused because of the Martian Manhunter and things like that.
Right.
Like, they first went to the Martians and were like, hey, you want to be this galactic police force for us? And they're like, nah, we got better things to do. So they made these robot AI things called Manhunters based on the Martian Manhunters in a lot of ways. And the Manhunters eventually get sentient and realize they don't like what they're doing. They start killing everything. That's the massacre of Sector 666, if I remember correctly. And am I on the right path so far?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, and you can see like the history of, because in the Justice League Unlimited or Justice League animated series, they have the Manhunters show up there. Also, the Green Lantern CGI animated series, there's a bit with Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner where the Manhunters start showing up. So there's some. I can't remember if the Manhunters showed up in Batman Brave and the Bold. I know Guy Gardner shows up in Brave and the Bold, but we'll talk about Guy later. But like, yeah, the Manhunters, they were basically like supposed to be like the ultimate police force because they don't have the compassion or emotions. They just do the thing that needed to be done. Unfortunately, that started getting bad.
Yeah, and you find out that actually it worked. Like, it was going just fine, but there was a Guardian who kind of has gone bad named Krona, who basically reprogrammed them. But you find that out, like, because comic book logic, right? Like, that happens, like, years later. They, like, sort of, like, rewrite that part. Like,
right, the retconning. It
fits in.
Yep.
Yeah. It's so comic book, right? It's so soap opera. I love it. Mm-hmm. So then, with this terrible failed experiment of the Manhunters, the Guardians, they make power rings and they get aliens and from all over the universe and they create the Green Lantern Corps. So that's where the Corps comes from. That's basically the history of the Corps, how they come to be. Then you just have this constant up and down of the Corps over years because, I mean, we're telling stories, right? So we need conflict. And a lot of times when you're telling Green Lantern Corps stories, it's about how the Corps falls and the Corps rises and the Corps gets a bad name and the Corps recovers their name and the Corps disassembles or everybody's killed and then they have to rebuild the Corps from somewhere. Like, that is kind of the cycle of storytelling that they go along with these Green Lantern Corps stories. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's the Green Lantern First Flight movie is pretty good. It's okay. It's not my favorite animated one, but the Green Lantern Emerald Knights, which is 6 short stories about different Green Lanterns that are not Hal or John or Guy, is really good. You should definitely go and check that out. That one's got some. I mean, some of the DC movies, particularly more recently, have had some pretty higher PG-13 and higher ratings. This one doesn't have that, but there's definitely some, like, a bunch of lanterns die. So, like, when the lanterns die, the rings either return to Oa or they find another host if able. And at one point during this movie, like, there is, like, a rain of rings that are falling on Oa from all of the dead lanterns. Like, it's bonkers. Yeah. Super good, though. It talks about a lot of stuff. It's basically Hal teaching a new lantern about the history of the Corps while they're trying to stop, if I remember correctly, Krona from returning from the dimension
zone?
Next door. Yeah, the antimatter, universe next door.
The void zone, whatever it's called. There's like a zone, I forget exactly what it's called, that is like sitting there next door where Necron, which when we talk about the Black Lanterns, like he kind of hangs out there these days.
Well then let's talk. Let's kind of fold into that because the next thing we probably should talk about is Sinestro.
Yes. I mean, we should probably talk about Sinestro and then Parallax, I suppose, huh?
Yeah, I don't know if we have to. I'm not, yeah.
Well,
let's talk about Sinestro.
Sure. I mean, Parallax is the thing that makes, that explains the whole yellow energy, why yellow doesn't work.
It does. Its original incarnation kind of made me going, you what? And they kind of like tweaked it and fixed it. So I think it's tighter now, but at the beginning it was a little bit, it was a little out of left field. But they had to fix it. But they did. I thought they fixed it. It made sense to me. No, I think now it works great. And then you've got all of these other lantern rings, which I also thought was like, whoa, where is this coming from? But I think it works really. It makes for a much more interesting, compelling story that includes the green rings along with a bunch of other colors. But before we get there, let's talk about Sinestro.
So he's basically the foil to Hal Jordan in a lot of ways. Like, he's a lot like Hal, but he is not Hal, right? Like, he is the sort of the mirror reflection, and then he eventually goes bad, so that you don't always have to have Hal go bad, but Hal does go bad anyway. But that's who Sinestro is. Like, he cares a lot. He doesn't think that it always works out the way that it's supposed to be going, so he eventually like does things his own way in some ways, and it goes kind of wrong.
And Sinestro was a member of the Corps, kind of his current like incarnation of who he is he trained Hal. It was basically kind of an officer and a gentleman. kind of a thing. And you can see that in First Flight where Hal's being trained by Sinestro before Sinestro loses confidence in the Guardians and finds this alternate ring source.
This yellow ring, I should say?
Yes, this ring that makes constructs that no Green Lantern can do anything about.
Mm-hmm. And also works off of fear in a lot of ways.
Right. Instead of will, it's fear. So the idea that fear is the enemy of will is interesting as well, which I actually really like. Yeah,
me too. I think it's a clever opposite thing, especially when they start getting into how some of the Green Lanterns can actually eventually deal with that if they can face their fears down.
Well, and that's part of the thing. Like there was in Marvel Comics, there's Daredevil, who's known as the Man Without Fear, but in DC Comics, that was Hal. Hal was called Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, the Man Without Fear. Mm-hmm. That was his whole thing. He could master the ring because his control of fear, being a test pilot, allowed him to manifest will in a way that, some other lanterns, more powerfully than some other lanterns.
So Sinestro is an interesting character because he has a sense of honor about him. He believes, he has causes and he believes in things, which is what makes him way better as a villain, because he's the fallen knight, right? Like that's what he is. So he's the one who didn't agree with the ideals of what was going on, and since he was the guy who used to be on the inside, he knows how the organization works. He can basically rip them apart if he wants to, and that's kind of what he tries to do a lot of the time.
Right, exactly.
It's a good story that they usually try to tell with him. And then of course, you start getting, you don't like Parallax. I do. I think he's fascinating as a creature and entity.
I will say that some of my reactions to certain things are when they were first introduced, and then they get fixed. So Jason Todd was not a good character. When he was originally, because Jason was trying to be a character he was not. So they made a character that was trying to be not Robin and not Dick Grayson, but they made him so not Dick Grayson, he just wasn't appropriate as being Robin. As Red Hood and the history and how it folds in and his dynamic as a foil, like you say, in many ways to the Bat Family, he's fantastic. He's great. Uh-huh. But sometimes you create an idea and you have to kind of let it become its own thing. And when Parallax was first introduced, it was kind of weird and heavy-handed and out of left field. But in retrospect now, as they built up so much more lore about the core and the rings and the colors and all this kind of stuff, it belongs there. It makes a much more sense than it did before. Before it was like, boy, you're really kind of shoehorning something in here that you're trying to explain. But they built so much more around it since then that it works. I think it works.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I suppose we should mention that Kyle Rayner exists at this point.
Oh yeah, I keep forgetting. Sorry, Kyle. I keep forgetting about Kyle.
Because that happens before Darkest Night, which, I mean, in all reality out there, people who are listening to this, if you want to read a real good Green Lantern story, just go pick up Darkest Night. Like, it's probably one of the best. I mean, you might be a little lost in certain ways because it's hard to,
there's a lot of history going in there.
There's a lot of history there, but yeah. Maybe after listening to this, you'll know enough of it that when you pick it up, it won't be so crazy. It is the good story, but there's a point where the Lantern Corps falls apart. It just because that's what happens, right? I think it was Universo and the Legion of Superheroes. They came back and they messed with the Corps or something like that happened. I constantly forget about this, like how all this stuff works. And Jordan gets possessed by Parallax, who's in the Green Lantern battery. That's why their ring doesn't work on Yellow, right?
Right. So Parallax is like this manifestation of fear, and they
have him trapped inside of it. Yeah. It's a prison too. It's kind of neat. It also helps power the battery in a lot of ways. So Jordan gets possessed, and then he just basically, inside man job again, decimates the Corps, and there's not really much of a Corps left anymore. And then there's like one ring left, and it goes to Kyle Rayner, and then Kyle Rayner has to basically fix everything.
Right. And I think that was part of it too with Parallax for me, because I was like, you just made Hal Jordan a villain? You just made him not just a villain, like a murdering psychopath. Like, that's not my Hal. Like,
it's not your Hal.
No, not my Hal. So I think that was another thing with Parallax where I was just like, oh, I don't like that part of history.
You didn't enjoy that heel face turn or that face heel turn?
No, I did not.
What, we don't like seeing our heroes become the villains? Is that the thing there? I mean, I get it.
I'm okay with it when it makes sense. It was really extreme and out of left field. And it was because, if I remember correctly, because Coast City got destroyed was part of it.
Yeah.
And so he went insane and...
I mean, he lost a lot of the things that he cared about. Yeah. And it's what let Parallax get inside of his head.
Right, yeah. So, a little bit nuts. They've since fixed... And then he died, saving the world in Darkest Night, right?
I think so. If I remember correctly, yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter because they all come back to life anyway,
I know,
right?
Yeah. So it was Sun Eater, actually, which kind of that comment leads us into what happens with these Black Lantern Corps, right? So Hal's dead, Barry's dead. I want to say Marrow was dead. Like Aquaman's wife, Marrow was dead.
Yeah.
Like, there's just all
Everybody's
these dead. Everybody, so many people are dead in the DC universe, and then they started coming back, and weird things were happening. And because of the way it was, they're like, hey, in comic books, everybody comes back from the dead. That might cause a problem. Like, why is there an open door, like a rotating door from death to life for just these protagonist characters? And then, yeah.
I mean, that's comic books, though, right? Like, you can't kill. Okay, do you want to have this conversation? We can have this conversation. I don't really mind having.
Well, I'm just saying that led to the whole plot line of what happened with the Black Lanterns, right? Because it was part of that. There's like basically the doorway between living and dead were cut through with Swiss cheese because of all of this stuff that was happening. Then we had the Black Lanterns, and then all the other colored lanterns as well. So. Let's dive into that. So we've got a yellow ring and the yellow lantern, which is Sinestro, which becomes more than one eventually.
Well, he eventually puts together the Sinestro Corpse. Which then there is more yellow power wielding ring users at that point. But I mean, Blackest Night starts with a prophecy. I mean, who doesn't love a good prophecy, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a cosmic revelation, and the prophecy is called Blackest Night. And then it's about how there's going to be 7 different colored corps at war with each other, eventually destroying one another and the universe. So, like you said, there's this Swiss cheese problem, basically, with existence, with all of reality. And these Black Lanterns start popping up. It's Scar, a rogue guardian who... is the person that's reviving these deceased members as Black Lanterns. And, Guy Gardner, Kyle Rayner, and Slack, they're the ones who need to, like, go and deal with the situation. Like, please stop this from happening. And then during the course of the story, they put together a blue ring, which is powered by hope. And that's where the first kind of ring comes. And then a whole bunch of other colors start popping up all over the place. You get the Red Lantern Corps, the Indigo Tribe, the Blue Lantern Corps, the Agent Orange, and the Star Sapphires, the purple ones, who they're powered by love, which who doesn't love that, right? Like, I am very much in the camp of most of my comrades when it comes to romance and love in storytelling and gaming. Like, who doesn't love a little kissing and a little bit of love in a good story, right? Like, that just makes it better for me.
Well, and then they incorporated some of this stuff, like they kind of retconned some things. So one of Green Lantern's, or they incorporated a lot of the Green Lantern kind of history, right? So one of the first Black Lanterns that came up was Black Hand, which is an old villain of Hal's from, like, I remember reading in the 70s. There was Star Sapphire, who had been a different villain and then became Carol Ferris, who was Hal's ex-girlfriend. And so they kind of incorporated Star Sapphire's powers into the kind of the Indigo ring bearing characters. Is it Indigo? It was the Indigo ones. I can't remember. Violet. One of the ones the one that was powered by love, but it was often twisted from love to jealousy, and it's like not good love, like possession kind of a love.
It puts that spin on it, right? I mean, that story. There's just so many interesting things that are going on there. Like that's where the Scarecrow gets a ring and becomes a Yellow Lantern. Like, that's terrifying in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah. That
happened. Deadman is running around. I love Deadman as a character, by the way. So like, he's running around. He's the one who's letting people know, like, this isn't good. Like, these superheroes who are coming back aren't really themselves.
For those of you who don't know Deadman, because he didn't show up in Young Justice, Deadman is a character named Boston Brand, who he's the only other that I can think of, the only other circus focused trapeze artist who is a superhero besides Dick. He died and came back to life, and often shows up even though he's not a detective, he shows up a lot associated with Batman and whatnot, he was originally trying to solve his own murder. And then there are various reasons why he needs to do other things as well. And he showed up in the Justice League animated series a couple of times and was great. So you can go check out episodes with him in it. It was really good.
Yeah. So I do. And if you haven't seen Justice League Dark, he's in there. Did you mention that? Did you say that?
He is in Justice League Dark. I saw it once. It's pretty good, actually. Another one that's kind of rated R, though. You got to watch it. But he's good, especially a couple times when he takes over Batman.
That's great.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, yes, because he only can communicate with most people by possessing their bodies and talking to someone else through that body, which is can be very entertaining situations.
So the neat thing about Darkest Night is you get to see all these different superheroes like Hawkman and Hawkgirl who are dead, and Flash being, sort of dead. And there's just, oh man, there's, like you said, there's just so many superheroes who are dead who pick up these Black Lantern rings and then become Black Lanterns. Like they build this Black Lantern Corps. In the end, if I remember correctly, like you might have to help me along with this. It seems like it was Hal or Kyle that it was Hal merges with the Life entity, and the White Lantern Corps, they're the ones that defeat Necron, Necron is this Black Lantern who's kind of like the big bad and runs around with this scythe. They're the ones who banish him from the realm of the living. I think they throw him in the Void Realm or whatever it's called. And that's how they sort of restore order to the universe.
Right, by creating the White Lantern Corps, by creating the White Lantern Ring, because that gets passed around to a few different people. Sure
does. It just bounces around, because right after that is Brightest Day, which is not as good as Darkest Night. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Because that just follows around a bunch of people who got resurrected, but nobody knows why. So that is a thing. Like Sinestro, he finds this White Lantern battery, which no lantern can move, but Deadman, Boston Brand, we already talked about him. He picks up the White Lantern battery and gets charged with life energy, and then it's his job to find somebody to take the entity's place. That's right. Like, here you go, Deadman. Have another cool storyline. Like, all right.
Right. So we should make a comment. The whole Brightest Day, Blackest Night, Darkest Night thing is based on the Green Lantern Corps oath, which to recharge the rings, the Hal and the Green Lanterns have to say a particular phrase that gives them access, whether it helps them access their will to be able to draw on the ring, or it's like just a secret code. I don't know how they explain why that's a thing, but it's in Brightest Day and Blackest Night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light. And so there are often references in Green Lantern's stuff to Brightest Day, Blackest Night, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, that is probably the most impactful Green Lantern story that exists. It because it's the thing that created all these other different corps, and then it just gets they really get pretty back out into space and pretty epic at that point. They do this thing with the rise of the Third Army, because that's when that's after Flashpoint, I think, and that's when the Guardians are like, well, hey, Green Lantern Corps, you're not really working. We're gonna come up with a new galactic police force, because you're a failed experiment. Because it seems like it's about time to do that, right? Like that's just it's like, it's kind of working. Can't you just leave it alone, you people who think you're way smarter than you are? So the way that they do that is they have this. They don't even remember. It's so long ago that the Guardians don't even remember. They have this power source somewhere. There's something that's trapped somewhere, and they kind of call it the First Lantern, and they basically use the energy from this thing to create this Third Army. They're beings with no free will that are made out of Guardians' biotissue. So they use this energy from this thing and some of the Guardian tissue, and create this army, basically. And, then there's a giant fight, of course. Like, oh, look at that. We're wiping out Green Lanterns and taking them away, and we got this new army and whatnot. And then they want to make more of them. They start doing that, and they don't realize that they're breaking the prison down that's holding this First Lantern this First Lantern called Volthoom, who's like this traveler from a different time and space and dimension. And he's somebody who figured out how to access this color spectrum of energy. that all these different lantern cores are using, and he can use all of them, and he's stronger than pretty much all of them, and he's stronger than most of the gods around. Like, he just destroys and beats the ever living love out of everyone constantly. So that goes on for many, many issues.
You're now into like stuff past Darkest Night that I am less familiar with, so I'm fascinated.
Oh yeah, it's just really, it's like, oh look, here's the person that kind of figured out how to do all this stuff and basically taught the Guardians how to do all this stuff. So like, here's your progenitor. Go deal with your progenitor now, who doesn't really appreciate anything that you've done. Also went crazy because when he accessed this energy to try to travel back to his original dimension, he went insane instead and decided to start destroying everything.
Nice.
So they trapped him up. So that's kind of what happens there. Like, and eventually, using a bunch of different Deus Ex Machinas and teamwork and
right.
things that are written in there, they trap him again. They deal with him and they get rid of him. They throw him out of existence. People die, it goes bad, this, that, and the other thing. It's all very cosmic epic type storytelling though. Yeah.
There's multiple lanterns, like not just the lanterns, but there's multiple lanterns for each sector you were talking about. And because of this stuff where it's like, okay, Hal's dead, now he's not dead. And, so they had the backup Green Lantern for Sector 2814? Is
it? Sure. We'll just call it that. I mean,
I'm pretty sure that it's 2814. You know what's funny is I'm actually playing. So there's a song called Ring Capacity by Kirby Crackle. You should listen to it. It's a song all about Hal. And it starts off like, I'm flying through the cold of space, seems I've yet to find my place, guarding 2814, I don't know why it's chosen me. When from the corner of my eye I catch a glimpse of evil light, the fear it tries to swallow me like I'm just some guy with an emerald ring. And it's basically, the ring capacity part is the chorus is counting down the percentage of energy he has left in his ring as he's losing this battle against Sinestro. And then recharging the ring and what it feels like for him to recharge the ring and become more powerful again. It's a fantastic song. You should go find it. But yeah, it is. It's 2814. So I was playing the song in my head, trying to it is 2814, right? Yeah, that's it. So they had the backup Green Lantern was John Stewart, who's the Green Lantern that we see in the Justice League animated series, and then Hal does make a brief appearance. So you do find out that in the Justice League animated series, there was a Green Lantern before John. Just a brief appearance during a time travel jumping episode.
Yeah, that was a great episode. I love that episode.
It was a really funny episode. And then you also have Guy Gardner. So Guy Gardner showed up, of course, when Hal was gone. Then John was there, but they also needed a backup, a second Green Lantern because Hal was gone and John was there. And apparently when Abin died, the ring had two choices. It's just that Hal was a little closer to the ring than Guy Gardner was on Earth. So it went to Hal. And when Guy found out about that, that's one of the reasons why he hates Hal. And he's like, what? You were just like 6 inches closer? What's up with that? And so Guy, who is just an absolute raging jerk, but also has no fear because he's an absolute raging jerk, ends up getting a ring as well. I don't exactly know. I guess, was it Kyle when Kyle got the ring after the core had been destroyed by Hal? Is that what ended up happening?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly
so then there was Kyle Rayner, who was a young artist with a very powerful imagination. So a ring went to him after the core had been, largely destroyed. And then I'm trying to think, are there any other ones for Earth, for the 2814 sector?
Those are there are later because Alan Scott's daughter gets a ring at some point.
Oh, Alan Scott's daughter Jade doesn't have a ring. She was born with the same magical power of the ring, just because he had been exposed to the Starheart energy for so long that she was born with just that raw power without a ring. She might have ended up getting a ring too, but the original character was born with the power.
In Rebirth, after Rebirth, there's there's some more characters that get assigned to protect Earth that have power batteries and rings and whatnot. There's Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz. I think there's somebody else. It's slipping my mind who it is. Somebody named Rami.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with a lot of the Rebirth stuff.
Yeah, so there's some other newer people that are I'm not super familiar with the Rebirth stuff either. Like it's not at the tip of my my knowledge base, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, the last kind of stories that hit me were the stuff with Godhead, because that's Kyle Rayner breaching the source wall, and I like New God stuff too, right? Like I mean, who doesn't like that Kirby crackle?
Let's talk about this, because, we mentioned the God Wall briefly, I think, in the Jeff Stormer episode, but let's talk about where this crosses over, because, again, this Season 3 Outsiders is supposed to be a galaxy-wide, basically, weapons, weapons rivalry, with this human metagenes, finding out that humans have this adaptive quality that if they're stressed out in particular environments or by certain situations, they develop these survival mechanisms, which is basically how humans have origins on Earth, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to be this weapons, arms race going on in the galaxy-wide situation, which means I can imagine the core is going to get involved. We're going to have this crossover with all the Kirby Fourth World stuff, and of course, like the Bang Babies or the characters like Static Shock and all the kids who are created, by their metagenes being forcibly created, stuff like that.
The best version of Apache Chief ever.
Oh my God, it's so good, right? Just watching this astral form aspect of him growing to that height, I was like, what a genius take on him. It's so good. So let's talk about what is the source wall and how does it kind of cross over? Is this Venn diagram between like the Lantern Corps and the Kirby stuff?
So in the story Godhead, Kyle Rayner, he crosses or breaches the source wall and he figures out the life equation. And then Highfather figures out that he knows that and he's like, oh, you should give me that. I want that because it'll let me beat Darkseid. Right? So really, the whole story is just that. Like, I want the life equation so I can beat Darkseid. And Kyle's like, I need to not let you have this. So that escalates, because it's a lot of power, into this really gigantic war, basically, where the Green Lanterns ally with the Sinestro Corps and everybody else to fight against the new gods. And it goes poorly for the Lanterns in a lot of ways, because, it always goes poorly for the Lanterns. That seems to be a running theme with any story here. Like, it just goes bad for the Lanterns, whatever they get involved in. Like, I feel like they should just stop getting involved. They might survive longer. Holy Lord. Right. Anyways, Highfather eventually gets the life equation from Rayner. He goes to fight Darkseid. For some reason, it ends up on Earth because, comic books. And then eventually Highfather, things are get crazier from there. Like, Black Hand shows up. The more Black Lanterns get created. They make them out of Titans held in the source wall. They get transported into Genesis thanks to Sinestro. There's just there's many, many stories. There's many books that you can read, or a collected book that you can read that'll tell all this stuff. And, finally the Highfather is like, maybe I should just stop this because I'm acting way too much like Darkseid. And that's kind of how it ends in a lot of ways. They basically show Highfather, you should probably stop being a jerk. And that's kind of how it all ends. It's very bizarre that it ends that way.
Well, it's funny because I just looked up a couple things and I was actually wrong. So the source wall, this object in the DC universe that's at the quote unquote edge of the multiverse of the DC universe, which beyond this construct is something called the source. And theoretically, the source wall, which prevents people from reaching the source, is passable. But once you pass it, or if you do manage to get past it, you end up being absorbed into the wall itself. So the wall basically looks like this living wall of aliens and creatures and people and gods that have been stuck in this wall. And I thought it had been created by Jack Kirby, but actually it turns out Jack Kirby had referenced something similar to it. So Metron, one of the characters from the New Gods, using this chair that he flies around in, this Mobius chair, which has these cosmic energy, explores what he calls just the final barrier, where he says, and somewhere beyond lies the source, the greatest of all mysteries. But it was actually Chris Claremont and Walt Simonson during an X-Men New Teen Titans crossover that they actually first drew the source wall and referred to it as the source wall. And that would have been, I don't know when that was, mid-80s?
Yeah, probably the 80s.
It's Claremont, so Chris Claremont, so it was probably the 80s, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was probably writing that while he was doing X-Men, right?
Yeah, he was doing X-Men. Yep. And then, so that's so interesting because it just seems so Kirby. And it sounds like, Kirby kind of had a seed of inspiration for it, but.
Well, all these writers were all influenced by each other, right? And Kirby was kind of the apex of that. So it only makes sense that some of them would imitate or be influenced by Kirby, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this source wall comes up just like a lot of the New God stuff. It comes up in a lot of Superman stories, obviously the Green Lantern stories. The Green Lanterns also had this thing about how the universe was created, and like they periodically, and just like Flash, they go through time and they go through space and they go to the edge of the galaxies and the universe and the known everything, and there's just this hand. Like when they reach the edge of time, the beginning of time, there's just like this hand suspended at the beginning of universe that they don't know what that is.
I mean, it's just that is just some of the bizarre stuff that's out there, right? Like,
yeah.
And I love it because it's like you're asking yourself those questions, like, why is this here? Like, that is so weird and doesn't make any sense, but it's out there. Like, what is it doing there?
Yeah, exactly. And they call it the hand of creation. And it shows up in the Justice League animated series. It shows up in various things in the comics as well. In the Green Lantern animated series, I think it showed up. Like, it's this freaking hand of creation is everywhere. But who it is and what it is and where it comes from and what it's doing and what the implications are, we have no idea. Like, at least I don't have any idea. I think people have made some speculations and have probably tried to, answer those questions, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it shows up in Young Justice. I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
I feel like it probably will for the whatever 10 or 12 episodes that we're going to get, because if they're going to do a cosmic story, which I hope they do, then
I think they will. Well, season three is going to be 26 episodes, so we'll see if we get. Yep. Good. So and if it does well on the streaming service, I suspect they'll get some more seasons. So.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to get more seasons.
We'll see. Yeah, I hope so. I hope people support the streaming service simply because that's where we're getting it. It's always a thing. We could talk about that another time too. So this Green Lantern Corps thing it covers everything and anything, and it's only a fraction of the galaxy that we're talking about. Like, there's also things like the war world is a big historic thing, right? The Green Lantern Corps we talked about, Thanagar, which is the home of the Hawks, which we haven't gotten much of anything about them in Young Justice. There's the planet Ran, which we get some nods to, but Thanagar and Ran have major wars and conflicts in the comics as well that the Green Lantern Corps sometimes get involved with, and there's just so much stuff going on. Like, I wanted to kind of tap into like the Hawks as well as a history, but I think we're going to have to pass on that because we had just so much stuff with the Green Lantern Corps that we're talking about.
There's just, because that is a gigantic, because we always think of the Trinity, right? We always think of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, but the Green Lantern Corps is a whole nother side of it. I mean, we didn't even, I think you've talked about it. Maybe I heard it somewhere else. The whole series of stories, it's just the Green Lantern and the Green Arrow. Like, those books are great. Yeah.
That was in the 70s, the 70s series where Oliver Queen had lost his money, and he and, of course, because they both have green in the name, they were often teamed up together. And they had their own comic series, the Green Arrow, Green Lantern series, where Hal was supposed to be kind of a conservative space cop, and Oliver was supposed to be more of a kind of a liberal, blah blah blah. So they were, traveling the United States, looking at how real people lived, and it was fascinating, which is a completely different concept. This was in the late '60s, early '70s, so. There was a lot of civil rights stuff was brand new and that kind of stuff. So it was exploring a lot of social issues at the time.
Which was fascinating.
Really fascinating. Yeah, there's definitely some classic stories. And of course, we talked about it in the Roy Harper Speedy episode too, just about that's where the, Snowbirds Don't Fly comic with Speedy being a heroin addict was revealed as well. Was in that series, yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on now that you've run through the history of the Green Lantern Corps?
No, I think I'm good. I mean, if you want to talk about Thanagar, we could talk about Thanagar and drive Neil crazy with all the stuff he has to edit.
Oh my gosh. I think we're going to have to pocket Thanagar for another discussion. There's just way too much bunker stuff going on. Like, just the whole idea that they were dead with the Black Lantern rings
Yep.
It just adds
That
a
happened.
whole new dimension of their reincarnated bonkers history. So we'll save the Hawks for another time. So thanks so much. Thanks so much for spending time with us in the Watchtower, Chris. Where can people find you out in Earth Prime?
Oh, you can catch me at misdirectedmark.com. That is probably the best place. Encoded Designs. If you want to email me, it's chris@misdirectedmark.com. On Twitter, @misdirectedmark. On G+, I'm Chris Sniezak. On Facebook, I am Chris Sniezak or Misdirected Mark. There you go.
That's fantastic. Thanks to everyone else for sharing some time with us as well. You can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files, on Facebook at Crashing the Mode, on Tumblr at theyjfiles.tumblr.com, and on our website, www.crashingthemode.com. Finally, at our email address, whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy our show, please consider sharing it with a friend. You can also support the show by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. The ratings really do help others find the show. If you leave us a review, please let us know, especially if you're outside the U.S. We have to look a little harder to find those.
And even though season 3 has been officially announced, please continue to spread the word to friends and family about the series. Hashtag buy YJ Comics on Comixology to get us even more stories even sooner and get yourself up to speed for the season 3 premiere.
And as always,
stay whelmed, everybody.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our hosts are Rich Howard and Emily Booza. Our editor and producer is Neil Powell. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.